Last night at exactly 3 a.m., I heard a strange metallic noise coming from my backyard. Seconds later, my daughter screamed, "Dad, there's someone in the house." I searched every room, then checked my security cameras. Every camera worked perfectly, except for one missing minute at exactly 3 a.m. The next morning, I took my DVR to a data recovery specialist. He managed to restore those missing seconds. When the footage ended, he turned pale and whispered, "Sir, don't go back home alone." I looked at the screen, and what I saw made my blood run cold. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from your city, your country. I'd love to know. Here on Revenge, Dad, every voice matters. A quick note, this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to real people or places is coincidental, but everything it teaches you is worth keeping. My name is Thomas Walker. I am 71 years old, and I have spent the better part of my life learning how to spot a lie. For 35 years, I worked as a fraud investigator for Pacific Northwest Insurance, first out of Portland, then later from the Los Angeles Regional Office on Wilshire Boulevard. My job was never glamorous. I didn't chase criminals down alleyways or kick in doors. I sat in windowless rooms with stacks of photographs, insurance claims, and blurry surveillance footage, searching for the one small detail the liar had forgotten to hide. Sometimes it was a shadow falling in the wrong direction. Sometimes it was a receipt time-stamped 3 minutes before the fire that supposedly started by accident. Sometimes it was nothing more than a man blinking too slowly when he said his wife's name. I retired 3 years ago, and for the first 8 months of retirement, the only thing I investigated was which brand of coffee tasted best at 6 in the morning when the San Gabriel Mountains turned pink outside my kitchen window. Then Margaret got sick. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer on a Tuesday in February. By June, she was gone. 4 months. The doctors said we caught it late, which was their careful way of saying we never had a real chance. Margaret herself never used the word unfair. She used the word inconvenient. And the first time she said it, sitting in the oncologist's office with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, I had to press my fist against my mouth to keep from falling apart in front of her. I did my falling apart in the garage alone at night, where she couldn't hear me. Our home, the one we'd shared for nearly 30 years, sat in the Oak Knoll neighborhood of Pasadena, California. It was a California ranch-style house built in 1962, with a red tile roof, dark wood trim, and a backyard garden where Margaret had planted roses along the white wooden fence every spring for as long as I could remember. There were orange trees and lemon trees running along the side path, and in October, when the air cooled just enough to feel like a season was changing, the whole yard smelled faintly of citrus and dry grass. After Margaret passed, I couldn't bring myself to move a single thing that belonged to her. Her reading glasses were still on the side table by the window chair, the chair where she spent every Sunday morning, with a cup of tea and a paperback novel, her feet tucked underneath her like a woman half her age. Her recipe notebook, a small soft-covered thing in faded blue, sat in the top drawer of my desk, right side, exactly 1 finger width from the edge. She had shown me its location once, laughing, saying I would never find it otherwise. After she was gone, I kept it in that exact spot. It was one of the few things I could still do for her. Her clothes remained in the closet of our bedroom. I told myself I would deal with them eventually. But every time I opened that closet door, I could still catch the faint trace of her perfume, something light and clean that I never knew the name of, and I would close it again and walk away. Rebecca called every day in the weeks after the funeral. At first the calls were short, just checking in, making sure I had eaten, making sure I wasn't rattling around the house too much alone. Then the calls got longer. Then she started driving up from her place in Glendale on weekends, bringing food I hadn't asked for, and straightening things that didn't need straightening. I didn't mind. I was lonelier than I had admitted to anyone, including myself. One evening in early October, Rebecca and her husband Michael came for dinner. I had made pasta the only thing I cook with any confidence, and the 3 of us sat at the kitchen table while the last of the daylight faded over the backyard. Rebecca waited until I had set down my fork before she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Dad," she said, her brown eyes soft, with what looked like genuine worry. "We've been talking, Michael and I, and we don't think you should be here alone." I looked at her hand on mine. "I'm fine, Rebecca." "You say that," she said, "but you're in this house by yourself, and it's big, and..." She paused, her voice catching in a way that made my chest ache. Mom would want someone here with you. Michael leaned forward in his chair. He was 47, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy smile that made people trust him before he said a single word. Tom, I want you to think of me as your son, he said warmly. That's how I think of myself. And a son doesn't let his father live alone in a house this size when he doesn't have to. We want to move in, Rebecca said. Just temporarily. Michael's development project hit a slowdown. Nothing serious, just timing. And it would give us a chance to be here with you while things settle, for all of us. I looked at my daughter's face. She had her mother's eyes, the same shape, the same directness. And she looked so tired and so sincere, and so much like the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, because she was convinced that if I was there, nothing bad could happen. My heart squeezed so hard it nearly hurt. All right, I said. Let's give it a try. Rebecca's face broke into a wide, relieved smile, and she squeezed my hand hard enough that I felt it in my knuckles. Michael reached over and clapped me on the shoulder, grinning. You won't regret this, Tom. I promise. I believe them. I believe them because I was 68 days into the loneliest stretch of my life, and because wanting something to be true is the oldest vulnerability in the human heart. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to suspect that evening, while the three of us sat together in Margaret's kitchen with pasta cooling on our plates, was that Michael Harlow had lost more than $600,000 in leveraged stock trades over the previous 10 months, that he owed nearly $300,000 more through a series of sports betting accounts he had opened under different email addresses, that the bank had already sent the first formal notice about their Glendale apartment, that Rebecca had quietly withdrawn every dollar of her retirement savings, trying to recover losses that only kept growing. They didn't come because they were worried about me. They came because my house was worth nearly $2 million, and they had run out of every other option. But that night, I didn't know any of it. I just passed Michael the bread and told Rebecca she could take the guest room on the first floor. The first 2 weeks were ordinary enough. Rebecca cooked dinners I hadn't eaten in months, roast chicken lemon rice, the kind of food Margaret used to make on Sunday evenings. Michael fixed the latch on the back garden gate that had been sticking since summer, and he offered to drive me to appointments whenever I needed it. Then, about 2 weeks after they moved in, Michael asked if he could take a look at my home security system. These older DVR setups can be unreliable, he said one morning, leaning against the kitchen door frame with a cup of coffee in his hand. I worked with a tech company a few years back. I can make sure everything's running properly. Update the firmware, maybe add a camera to the living room for better coverage. I told him that would be helpful. I even stood beside him while he worked, watching him move through the system menus with practiced confidence. That was my first mistake. The first thing that disappeared was my reading glasses. I keep them on the corner of my desk, have kept them there for 11 years, ever since my optometrist told me I needed them for anything smaller than a newspaper headline. I set them down in the same spot every single evening before bed. It is not a habit I formed consciously. It is simply what I do, the way certain routines calcify in a man's life until they become indistinguishable from instinct. On a Thursday morning in late October, I reached for them and found nothing but empty desk surface. I checked the kitchen. I checked the bathroom counter. I walked back to the bedroom twice and got down on one knee to look under the nightstand, which made my left knee throb the way it always does, when I forget it's not 30 years old anymore. I spent 20 minutes searching before Rebecca appeared in the doorway of my study, still holding her morning coffee, watching me with an expression I didn't know how to read. "Everything okay, Dad?" "My glasses?" I said. "I can't find them." She tilted her head, her brow creasing with what looked like tender concern. "Did you check the kitchen?" "First place I looked." She set her coffee mug on the bookshelf and helped me search. We found them 10 minutes later in the drawer beneath the kitchen sink, the one that holds extra towels and the rarely used garlic press, and absolutely nothing else I have ever deliberately placed there. "There they are," Rebecca said, holding them up with a small, gentle smile. "You must have set them down without thinking." I took the glasses from her hand. I looked at them for a moment. "I have never put anything in that drawer except dish towels," I said. Rebecca's smile didn't waver. It softened, actually, the kind of softening that felt rehearsed. "Dad," she said very carefully, as if she were choosing each word before picking it up. "Sometimes our minds get a little overloaded, especially after everything you've been through this year. It's completely normal." I put the glasses on. I looked at her. I didn't say anything else. but I noticed. Over the following 10 days, other things moved. My car keys turned up inside the refrigerator, on the middle shelf, between a carton of orange juice and the leftover pasta from Tuesday, in a place I had never once in my life set anything that wasn't food. A folder of property documents I kept in the locked top drawer of my filing cabinet appeared 3 days later, tucked beneath a stack of old newspapers on the hallway bench. The filing cabinet had been locked. I was certain of that. I am always certain of that. Each time Rebecca and Michael responded the same way. Their faces arranged themselves into matching expressions of gentle, practiced worry. "Are you sure you didn't leave the keys there yourself, Tom?" Michael asked one evening at dinner, his voice carrying the particular warmth of a man who wants to seem like he is asking a question, but is actually making a statement. "I've read that stress can do unusual things to memory, especially at—" He paused as if suddenly realizing he was about to say something indelicate. Well, at a certain point in life, I looked across the dinner table at him. His jaw was relaxed, his eyes steady. The spoon in his hand moved through his soup without the slightest tremor. "I'm 68 years old," I said, "not 108. Michael laughed a good-natured, disarming laugh. "Of course not. I just meant it happens to everyone." But what chilled me far more than the moving objects was what I heard 4 days later. I had come in through the back door after checking the garden, still wearing my jacket, when I caught the sound of Rebecca's voice carrying from the front porch. She was talking to someone. I recognized the voice of Carol Henson from 2 houses down, a woman Margaret used to trade tomato seedlings with every spring. I moved to the kitchen window and stood very still. "It's been happening more and more," Rebecca was saying. Her voice dropped into that particular register people use when they want to sound reluctant to share something painful. "He can't find things. He gets confused about what day it is. Last week he called me by Mom's name twice." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I heard Mrs. Henson make a soft, sympathetic sound. "I'm just so worried about him. His memory is going downhill pretty fast, and I don't know what to do." My hand curled around the edge of the kitchen counter. My knuckles went white, and I felt a sharp, burning pressure build behind my eyes. Not quite tears, but the heat that comes before them, when a man is trying very hard not to give himself away. I had not called Rebecca by Margaret's name, not once, not even in the fog of those first terrible weeks after the funeral, when everything had felt smeared and wrong. She was lying to our neighbor about me, and she was doing it with a grief in her voice that sounded absolutely real. When Rebecca came back inside, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water, my expression carefully neutral. She looked mildly startled to see me there. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. "Oh, just Carol from down the street." She hung her jacket on the hook by the door, her back briefly to me. "She was asking how you were doing." "And what did you tell her?" Rebecca turned around, and for just a fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, something flickered across her face. Then her expression settled into soft, daughterly warmth, and she crossed the kitchen and put her arms around me. "I told her you were taking things one day at a time," she said into my shoulder. "That we're here for you, that you have people who love you." She pulled back and looked up at my face, her eyes bright and earnest. "Because you do, Dad." That's all I said. I patted her arm. I told her I knew that. I even managed a small smile. But that evening, after Rebecca and Michael had gone to bed, I sat alone at my desk and stayed very still for a long time, with my hands flat on the surface in front of me. My heart was beating with a low, steady anger that I hadn't felt in years, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind that settles in and makes itself at home because it knows it's going to be there for a while. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. In the back corner, behind a folder of old tax returns, was a narrow notebook with a dark green cover, the kind I used to carry in my jacket pocket during investigations. I had filled dozens of them over 35 years. I hadn't opened one since the day I retired. I took it out. I found a pencil. I wrote the date at the top of the first page. Then I began to write down everything I remembered. I started small the way I always did. The first rule of any investigation is that you do not announce yourself. You do not confront, you do not accuse, and you do not let the other person know what you are looking for until you have already found it. In 35 years of fraud work, I had watched dozens of investigators blow cases wide open by moving too fast, by letting their certainty get ahead of their evidence. Certainty without proof is just anger wearing a suit. It feels righteous, and it accomplishes nothing. So, That first night sitting alone at my desk with the green notebook open in front of me, I did not write down accusations. I wrote down facts. The reading glasses found in the kitchen towel drawer on October 24th. The car keys found in the refrigerator on October 28th. The property folder found under newspapers on the hallway bench on October 31st. The filing cabinet had been locked. I noted that separately with an asterisk and underlined it twice. Then I started building systems. I sharpened 3 pencils and used the lightest possible touch to draw a small, nearly invisible mark at the inner edge of every drawer that contained financial documents, personal records, or anything relating to the house or my accounts. The mark sat flush against the frame. If someone opened the drawer and replaced everything carefully, the papers would shift, but the mark would shift with them. A 1/4-inch gap between the pencil line and the frame would tell me the drawer had been opened. I began photographing the position of important items before I went to bed each night. Not with the house security system. I had already begun to distrust that, but with my personal cell phone, which I kept charged in my jacket pocket and nowhere else. The reading glasses, the property files, Margaret's recipe notebook in its spot in the desk drawer exactly where she had always kept it. And I began paying attention to something I had let myself stop paying attention to over the previous weeks: Michael's patterns. He left the house at irregular hours. Sometimes early in the morning, before I came downstairs, sometimes late at night, after Rebecca had already gone to bed. He always had explanations: a contractor he needed to meet, a call he had to take somewhere with better reception, a prescription he had forgotten to pick up. The explanations were never quite the same twice, which is exactly what a careful person does when they don't want a pattern recognized. I noticed. I wrote it down. On the 3rd night of keeping the notebook, I sat back in my chair and looked at what I had written, and my mind traveled back 30 years almost without my permission. It was 1994. I was working out of the Portland office, and a colleague had passed me a case that nobody else wanted: too messy, too slow, too emotionally complicated for the investigators who preferred clean numbers and straightforward fraud. An elderly man named, well, I'll call him Arthur. Arthur was 73 years old, a retired school teacher living alone in a house in southeast Portland that had been in his family since the 1940s. His son had moved in the previous winter, claiming he wanted to help his father manage things. Within 6 months, Arthur couldn't find his own documents. His checkbook kept disappearing. His son had told neighbors that the old man's mind was going. The son had installed cameras, not to watch for intruders, to watch Arthur, to record every confused moment, every misplaced item, every instance of frustration. He was building a file. His plan was to petition the court for conservatorship of Arthur's estate under California probate code, the legal process by which a court determines that a person can no longer manage their own affairs and assigns someone else to do it for them. With conservatorship came control of Arthur's assets, and Arthur's house, as it happened, was worth a great deal. I broke that case with an old clock. The son had submitted photographs as evidence of his father's declining mental state. Arthur looking confused in his own kitchen. Arthur staring blankly at documents he supposedly couldn't understand. But in one photograph, the antique clock on the kitchen wall showed a time of 2:15. In another photograph, submitted as taken an hour later, the same clock showed 1:50. Someone had moved the hands between shots to alter the apparent timeline. A liar always forgets one small thing. I spent my whole career on that principle. I helped Arthur keep his house. I testified at the conservatorship hearing, presented the clock photographs, and watched the son's attorney try to explain away an inconsistency that had no innocent explanation. Arthur cried in the hallway afterward, not sad crying, but the helpless, overwhelmed kind that happens when an enormous pressure is suddenly and unexpectedly removed. He grabbed both my hands and held them for a long moment, and I remember thinking that I hoped nobody ever had to fight that particular battle. I had thought about Arthur once or twice over the years. Never once had I imagined I would need to remember him for my own sake. I closed the notebook and opened my laptop. I navigated to the administration panel of my home security system, the interface I had used for years to review footage, adjust camera angles, and manage recording schedules. It took me a moment to find what I was looking for, because I had never had cause to look at the user account section before. There were 2 administrator accounts listed. The first was mine, created in 2019 when I installed the system username and credentials I had set myself. The second account had been created on October 14th, 11 days ago. 4 days before, Michael had casually asked if he could take a look at the system, but he hadn't needed to ask first. In the days after he moved in, he had stood beside me twice while I logged in to check camera angles, once when I thought I heard something outside, once when Rebecca asked me to show her how the system worked. Both times Michael had been right there watching the screen over my shoulder. He hadn't needed to wait for an invitation. He had simply paid attention. The username on the second account was a string of random letters and numbers that meant nothing, but the account had full administrator privileges. Whoever held it could view any camera, delete any footage, and adjust any setting in the entire system. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my back teeth. I didn't delete the account. I didn't change my own password. I didn't do anything that would tell Michael I had found it. Instead, I opened the notebook again and wrote down the date the account was created, the username, and a single note to myself, in the shorthand I had used for 35 years of case files. Then I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark backyard. Margaret's roses were still out there along the fence, pale shapes in the October darkness, holding on past the end of their season, the way roses sometimes do when the California autumn runs warm. I stood there looking at them until my jaw unclenched and my breathing evened out. "All right," I said quietly to no one, or perhaps to Margaret, or perhaps to the investigator I had spent decades becoming. "Let's find the one small thing." The next morning, I walked next door and knocked on Frank Delgado's door. Frank Delgado opened the door before I finished knocking. He was 74 years old, built like a man who had once been larger and had simply compressed with age rather than shrunk. 20 years with the Portland Police Department had left him with a permanent stillness about him, the kind that doesn't come from calm, but from a lifetime of training yourself not to react until you understand exactly what you're reacting to. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I was wondering when you'd come by Tom." That sentence hit me somewhere behind the sternum. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I hadn't told anyone anything. "You'd better come in," he said. His kitchen smelled like coffee and something savory from breakfast. He poured me a cup without asking and set it on the table between us. Through the window, the San Gabriel Mountains caught the early morning light and turned a deep dusty gold. "How long have you been watching?" I asked. Frank wrapped both hands around his own mug. "Long enough," he said. "Your son-in-law parks 2 blocks down on Marengo, cuts his headlights before he turns onto the street, walks back through the side path." He paused. I wrote down the dates. He got up, opened the kitchen drawer, and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. 4 dates. All after midnight. The handwriting was neat and precise, the handwriting of a man who had spent decades filling out incident reports. My chest tightened as I read. One of those nights I had woken up at 2 in the morning, thinking I'd heard something outside. I had told myself it was the neighbor's cat. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I asked. Frank's expression shifted, not guilt exactly, but something close to it. "Family business," he said. "A man doesn't step into that without being asked. I figured you'd ask when you were ready." He was right. I couldn't be angry about it. "Did you ever see his face clearly?" I asked. "Not clearly enough for a positive ID." Frank picked up his mug. "But Tom, people only park that far away and cut their lights for one reason. They don't want anyone to hear them coming." I stared at the paper in my hand. 4 nights, 4 times Michael had left this house, parked 2 blocks away, and walked back in through the side path in the dark. 4 times I had been asleep upstairs alone with no idea. My throat tightened until swallowing hurt. "Keep watching," I said. "Quietly. Don't change anything you're doing." Frank nodded. "You got it." He refilled my coffee without being asked the way good neighbors do. "You need anything else, Tom? You knock, day or night." I thanked him and walked back across the yard. 3 days later, Rebecca smiled at me over the breakfast table and said she had made an appointment with a wonderful memory specialist she had found on South Lake Avenue. She said she just wanted to make sure I was getting the best possible care. She reached across and patted my hand. "You mean everything to me, Dad," she said. "I hope you know that." I told her I did. I squeezed her hand back. And I thought about 4 dates written in a retired cop's careful handwriting, sitting folded in the pocket of my jacket. The waiting room at Dr. Susan Holt's neurology practice on South Lake Avenue was the kind of place designed to feel reassuring and somehow manage the opposite: soft lighting, cream-colored walls, a small water feature in the corner that produced a sound like someone quietly, persistently clearing their throat. Rebecca sat beside me with her handbag on her knees and her back very straight. She had dressed carefully for this appointment, a pressed blouse, her hair pulled back. She looked, I thought, exactly like someone who wanted to be taken seriously by a doctor. I had dressed the way I always dress, slacks, a collared shirt, the same leather shoes I have worn to every appointment for the past decade. "How are you feeling?" Rebecca asked, turning to me with an expression of such concentrated tenderness that it made my back teeth ache. "I feel fine," I said. "I feel exactly the way I felt yesterday and the day before that." She patted my knee. "That's good, Dad. That's really good." Dr. Susan Holt was 52 years old, with silver-streaked hair, cut close to her jaw, and the unhurried manner of someone who had long since stopped being impressed by difficult situations. She shook my hand first, firmly, directly, and then Rebecca's. She asked us both to sit. "Mr. Walker," she said, opening a folder on her desk, "I understand you've been experiencing some memory concerns." I glanced sideways at Rebecca. "My daughter has concerns," I said carefully. "I've been trying to keep an open mind." Dr. Holt made a small note. She had, I noticed, excellent posture, and the habit of looking directly at whoever was speaking, not the distracted, divided attention of someone composing their response while you talk, but genuine focused listening. I liked her immediately. Rebecca leaned forward in her chair. "He's been misplacing things constantly," she said, her voice dropping into that soft, worried register I had come to recognize the way you recognize a song you've grown to dislike. "His keys were in the refrigerator. His glasses turned up in a kitchen drawer. Last week he forgot what day it was twice in the same afternoon." She pressed her lips together. "I hate even saying all this out loud, but I'm scared for him." Dr. Holt listened without interrupting. When Rebecca finished, the doctor looked at me with an expression that was carefully, professionally neutral. "Mr. Walker," she said, "would you like to respond to any of that?" I felt a hot, sharp pressure move through my chest. Not quite anger, something adjacent to it, like anger's more exhausted cousin. I breathed through it deliberately before I spoke. "I'd like to take whatever assessment you think is appropriate," I said. "And I'd like to take it alone if that's possible." Rebecca's head turned toward me sharply. "Dad, that's a perfectly reasonable request," Dr. Holt said, and the firmness in her voice settled the matter without drama. The cognitive assessment took 90 minutes. Dr. Holt walked me through a standardized battery of tests, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, a series of memory and recall exercises, verbal fluency tasks, and a lengthy structured interview about my daily functioning. She asked me to remember a list of 5 words, then asked me to recall them 20 minutes later, after we had discussed other things. She asked me to draw a clock showing 10 minutes past 11. She asked me to explain in sequence the steps I would take to mail a letter. I completed every section without difficulty. The 5 words Velvet Sunrise, Captain Envelope Bridge, I recalled in order without prompting. The clock I drew was precise. The letter mailing sequence I described correctly and in full. At one point, Dr. Holt looked up from her scoring sheet with an expression that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "You've done this kind of assessment before," she said. It wasn't a question. "I've administered versions of it," I said. "Professionally, in fraud investigations, cognitive testing sometimes comes up in cases involving elderly victims." She made another note. "That's helpful context." When Rebecca was invited back into the room, she sat down and folded her hands in her lap and looked at Dr. Holt with the expression of someone bracing for news they already believed they knew. Dr. Holt set her folder on the desk. "Mr. Walker's cognitive function is well within normal range," she said. "Better than average for his age group in several areas. There is no clinical evidence of memory impairment, early dementia, or any condition that would warrant concern about his capacity for independent living or financial decision-making." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Rebecca's face did something complicated and fast, a flicker of something raw and unguarded crossing her features before her expression rearranged itself into a wide, warm, relieved smile. If I hadn't spent 35 years watching people's faces for exactly that kind of micro-expression, I would have missed it entirely. "Oh, that's such a relief," Rebecca said, pressing one hand briefly to her chest. "I'm so relieved, Dad. Aren't you?" I said. In the car on the way home, Rebecca talked brightly about stopping for lunch, about a new restaurant on Colorado Boulevard she had been wanting to try, about how wonderful it was to get good news. Her voice filled the car, the way a radio fills a room, constant, warm, impossible to fully ignore. I watched the streets of Pasadena move past the window and thought about the flicker I had seen on her face when Dr. Holt delivered the results. That wasn't relief. I had seen real relief. I had seen it hundreds of times in my career, on the faces of people cleared of suspicion, reunited with missing things, told that what they feared wasn't true. What I had seen on Rebecca's face for those 4 raw seconds was the expression of someone who had just been told that the plan needs to change. When we got home, Michael was in the kitchen. He looked up from the counter where he was making coffee and directed his question past me straight at Rebecca. "How did it go?" he asked. Not, "How are you feeling, Tom? Not good news, I hope," he asked Rebecca, as if the results of my cognitive assessment were a report she was delivering on his behalf. Rebecca met his eyes across the kitchen. "Everything's fine," she said. Then she smiled at me and touched my arm. "Dad passed with flying colors." Michael smiled too. It was a good smile, practiced and warm and utterly empty. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard his voice through the floor, low, deliberate, the particular tone of someone being careful not to carry. I couldn't make out words, but I heard him say something and then pause, and then I heard Rebecca answer, and then I heard Michael say something else in the same flat, planning voice. I stared at the ceiling and thought, they are not done. They are absolutely not done. The clock on my nightstand read exactly 3 a.m. when the first sound came from the backyard. I had been lying awake for the better part of an hour already, not anxious exactly, but in that particular state of alertness that used to come over me during long surveillance operations, when the body knows something is coming before the mind has assembled the evidence. I had learned over decades of work to trust that feeling without indulging it. You stay still. You listen. You wait for the thing to show itself. The sound was small, a soft metallic scrape against the back gate latch, the kind of sound that a person moving carefully in the dark makes when they are trying very hard not to make any sound at all. I sat up slowly. I did not turn on the lamp. 37 seconds later, the scream tore through the house from somewhere below me. "Dad, Dad, there's someone in the house." Rebecca's voice hit every register at once, high and cracked and breathless, the way voices sound in genuine terror. I was on my feet before it finished. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand drawer. I had moved it there 3 nights ago, quietly without telling anyone, and I moved into the hallway. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were steady. After 35 years of training, my hands are always steady, even when the rest of me is not. Rebecca was standing at the entrance to the kitchen when I reached the bottom of the stairs. She had her arms wrapped around her own shoulders, her face drained of color, her eyes wide and fixed on the back hallway. She looked at first glance like a woman who had just been badly frightened. But I am not a first glance kind of man. In the 3 seconds it took me to cross the living room toward her, I registered the following. Her breathing was controlled, elevated slightly, but not the ragged gulping rhythm that genuine shock produces in the body. Her hands pressed against her own upper arms were not trembling, and her eyes were not scanning the room, the way eyes do when the threat might still be present. They were fixed, deliberate, pointed toward the back hallway like an arrow someone had carefully aimed. "Where?" I said. "The hallway," she gasped. "He walked right past me. He looked at me and then he ran toward the back." I moved through the house the way I had been trained to, methodical room by room, checking every space large enough to conceal a person. The kitchen, the laundry room, the bathroom off the hallway, the garage. I unlocked the back door and swept the flashlight beam across the yard. Nothing. The roses along the fence stood still in the cold November air. The lemon trees were dark shapes against a darker sky. Every door was locked. Every window was latched. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere, no broken glass, no splintered wood, no marks on any lock that suggested tools had been used against it. I came back inside and found Rebecca sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a glass of water she had poured for herself. Her color had returned with remarkable speed. "He's gone," I said. "There's nobody out there." "He was right there," she insisted, her voice carrying a tremor that was almost convincing. "I saw him, Dad. He was standing right in the hallway." I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I looked at her steadily. "Tell me exactly what you saw." She described a man medium height, dark clothing, a cap pulled low. She said he had looked directly at her before turning and running toward the back door. She said she had screamed without thinking. While she talked, I opened the security app on my phone and navigated to the camera footage for the back hallway and exterior. The back patio camera normal footage until 3 a.m. on the dot, then 60 seconds of gray static, then normal footage again at 3:01 a.m. I replayed it, same result. I checked the hallway camera, same 60-second gap, identical time stamps, 60 seconds, not a malfunction. A malfunction produces irregular artifacts, fragmented frames, inconsistent noise patterns. What I was looking at was a clean surgical deletion. Someone had accessed the system, removed exactly 60 seconds of footage from multiple cameras simultaneously, and replaced it with a static overlay. That required administrator-level access and deliberate action. It required exactly the kind of access Michael had created for himself 2 weeks ago. I heard the front door open. Michael came in carrying a small paper bag from the 24-hour CVS on Lake Avenue, his jacket collar turned up against the November cold. He took in the scene Rebecca at the table, me with my phone, with an expression of surprised concern that arrived precisely 1 beat too late to be genuine. "What happened?" he said, moving toward Rebecca. "Are you okay?" "Someone was in the house," Rebecca said. "Dad searched everywhere. He's gone." Michael turned to me, his brow creased with worried sympathy. "The security system probably glitched," he said. "These older DVR setups can lose signal sometimes. You might have heard something from the street and—" "How did you know I heard something?" I said, before Rebecca told you. The pause was brief, a fraction of a second, barely long enough to notice if you weren't looking for it. His jaw didn't tighten. His eyes didn't shift. He was good. "Rebecca just told me," he said easily. "Didn't you, Beck?" Rebecca nodded quickly. "I said you heard something outside right before I screamed," but she hadn't. I had been present for every word she had said since I came downstairs. She had said someone was in the house. She had described the man in dark clothing. She had not once mentioned that I had heard anything beforehand. Michael had known because he had been outside. He had heard me sit up. He had given Rebecca the signal. I looked at him for a long moment. My jaw ached from holding it still. My chest felt like something was being slowly, deliberately wrung inside it. Not fear, not anger, but the cold, heavy weight of certainty settling into a place where doubt used to live. "You're probably right," I said. "Old house, old system. I'm sure it was nothing." Michael's shoulders dropped slightly, the almost imperceptible release of breath that happens when a person believes they have just avoided something. I got up and refilled my water glass. The next morning, before either of them woke up, I took the DVR unit out of the hall cabinet, wrapped it in a dish towel, placed it carefully in the trunk of my car, and drove west on the 210 toward Burbank. Caleb Torres ran his data recovery shop out of a converted garage on a quiet street in Burbank, 3 blocks from the main commercial strip, and far enough from Pasadena that I felt reasonably certain Michael had never heard of it. The sign above the door read, "Torres Digital Recovery," in plain black letters. No logo, no tagline. The kind of business that doesn't need to advertise because everyone who finds it already needs exactly what it offers. Caleb himself was 34 years old, lean and precise, with the focused economy of movement that belongs to people who work with their hands on things that matter. He shook mine without excess warmth and got straight to it. "What am I working with?" he asked. I set the DVR on his workbench and told him what I needed: 60 seconds of deleted footage, any recoverable fragment, whatever the system hadn't fully overwritten. I told him someone with administrator access had done the deletion deliberately. Caleb picked up the unit and turned it over in his hands the way a doctor handles an X-ray. "Deliberately is actually helpful," he said. "Rush deletions leave more behind than people think. Give me a few hours." I drove to a diner 2 streets away and ordered coffee I didn't taste and eggs I didn't finish. I sat in the booth for 6 hours and 40 minutes and watched the traffic move on the street outside and tried very hard not to think about what I was going to do if Caleb found nothing. He called me back at 4:17 in the afternoon. When I walked into the shop, Caleb was sitting with his chair pulled close to the largest of his 3 monitors. He didn't look up right away. He waited until I had crossed the room and stood beside him before he spoke. "Shut the door," he said. "And Mr. Walker, does anyone besides yourself have administrator-level access to this system?" My stomach tightened like a fist closing. "Someone created a second admin account about 2 weeks ago," I said. "Someone who had physical access to the system and knew what he was doing. Caleb nodded slowly as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. That explains the deletion method, he said. This wasn't a factory reset or a power failure. Someone logged into the admin panel, selected a 60-second window across 4 cameras, simultaneously deleted the native files, and wrote a static noise overlay on top. Professionally done. He paused. I recovered 12 seconds. 12 seconds. My chest dropped. Play it, I said. The footage was dark and grainy, shot from the exterior back door camera at an angle that caught the lower half of the door frame and the edge of the patio. A figure appeared from the left side of the frame, moving without hesitation, without the tentative body language of someone unfamiliar with the space. He reached the back door. His right hand came up. A key turned in the lock in under 2 seconds, with the practiced ease of a man who had done it many times before. He knew exactly which camera covered which angle. He kept his face down and away. He moved with the particular unhurried confidence of someone who believes they are completely in control of the situation. Then, as he pushed the door inward and the frame shifted slightly, the exterior light caught the underside of his right wrist. A watch, square face, dark leather strap. A distinctive silhouette I recognized without needing to enhance the image or increase the contrast, or do anything except remember the moment I had placed it in a gift box and handed it across the Christmas dinner table 8 months ago. I had given Michael that watch. I had picked it out myself at a jewelry store on Colorado Boulevard because Rebecca had told me he admired it, and I had wanted him to feel welcome in this family. My throat closed around something that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite a sound. My eyes burned sharp and sudden, the way they do when the body understands something, a full second before the mind gives it permission to feel. Caleb looked at me steadily. He didn't ask if I recognized it. He could see the answer on my face. "Mr. Walker," he said quietly. "You need to be very careful about what you do next. Whoever that is, they planned this. Every step." I picked up the flash drive Caleb had prepared with the recovered footage. I held it in my palm and looked at it for a moment. This small, ordinary piece of plastic that contained 12 seconds of a man using a key to enter a house he did not own. "I know," I said. "I know exactly who that is." I thanked Caleb, walked to my car, and called Patrick Hayes. Patrick Hayes had practiced family law in Pasadena for 41 years, and in that time he had developed the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have heard every variety of difficult news and learned that the most useful thing they can do is not flinch. He watched the 12-second clip on my laptop without speaking. Then he watched it again. Then he leaned back in his leather chair, pressed his fingertips together in front of his chin, and looked at me across his desk on Colorado Boulevard with an expression that was careful and measured and entirely honest. "Tom," he said, "you know what 12 seconds of grainy footage and a watch means in a California courtroom?" "Reasonable doubt," I said. "Generous, reasonable doubt." He picked up his reading glasses and set them down again, without putting them on a habit I had noticed over 30 years, of knowing him something he did when he was choosing his words carefully. "The image quality is poor. The watch is a common style. His attorney would argue that you're a grieving widower who has convinced himself his son-in-law is a threat because you need somewhere to put your pain." He paused. "I'm not saying that's true. I'm telling you what a defense attorney would say." My jaw tightened until I felt it in the hinge. "So, we do nothing." "We do nothing rash," Patrick corrected firmly, but not unkindly. "There is a significant difference." He picked up his reading glasses a second time, and this time put them on, then pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and uncapped a pen. "We go to the police with what we have. We let them do their job, and we see what happens when Michael is asked to account for his whereabouts." What happened was, this 2 Pasadena Police Department officers came to the house the following morning. They were professional and thorough, and they treated me with the courtesy extended to elderly homeowners who report suspicious activity. They watched the footage. They examined the back door and the gate and the perimeter of the property. They found no evidence of forced entry and no physical evidence corroborating an intruder. Then they sat down with Michael. He was extraordinary to watch. His voice stayed level and warm. His posture was open and relaxed, his hands resting loose on the table in front of him. He expressed concern for me, genuine seeming measured concern, and then he produced from the front pocket of his jacket a receipt. CVS Pharmacy, Lake Avenue, Pasadena. Purchase timestamp 3:07 a.m. 2 items, a bottle of ibuprofen and a pack of throat lozenges. The younger officer looked at it then, at his partner. "The pharmacy is 4 minutes from here," the senior officer said to me, not unkindly. "That would place Mr. Harlow away from the property at the time your daughter reported the incident." I looked at the receipt in the officer's hand. My chest felt heavy and dense, like something solid was being pressed into the center of it. "He had time," I said. "He had time to stage it, drive there, and make a purchase." "That's possible," the officer agreed. "But without additional evidence, we can't establish that sequence of events." He closed his notebook. "We'll file a report and follow up if anything else develops." After they left, I drove to Patrick's office. He was waiting for me, with coffee already poured, which told me he had expected this outcome. "The receipt was prepared," I said, sitting down across from him. "He left enough time to create an alibi." "Almost certainly," Patrick agreed. "But almost certainly is not a legal standard." He handed me a mug. "Tom, I want to talk to you about something. Have you considered reporting this to Adult Protective Services?" "I considered it," I said. "What's your ready?" Patrick set his own mug down and folded his hands. "My read is that we don't. Not yet." His voice was precise and deliberate, the way it gets when he is explaining something that matters. California Adult Protective Services is a mandatory reporting system. Once a report is filed, the investigation becomes semi-public. Michael and Rebecca would know within days that a formal inquiry had been opened. If they know we're watching before we have solid evidence, they will destroy whatever we haven't found yet. He looked at me steadily. "We have 12 seconds of footage and a watch. We need considerably more than that before we expose our hand." I stared into my coffee. The afternoon light came through the window behind Patrick's desk and fell across the floor in long yellow rectangles. "Then we wait," I said. "We wait," Patrick agreed. "And we pay attention." He leaned forward. "Tom, in 40 years of practice, the cases that break open do so because the other side gets comfortable. Comfortable people get careless, and careless people leave something behind," I said. "They always do. I spent 35 years counting on it." Patrick nodded. "Exactly." I drove home in the late afternoon traffic on Colorado Boulevard, past the restaurant where Margaret and I had celebrated our 25th anniversary, past the bookstore where Rebecca used to spend her allowance on paperback mysteries when she was 12 years old. The city looked exactly the way it always looked, ordinary and unhurried and entirely unaware. When I walked through the front door, Rebecca was in the kitchen making dinner. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary, the same combination Margaret had used for a chicken recipe that Rebecca had apparently memorized without either of us realizing it. "How was your afternoon?" Rebecca asked, turning from the stove with a wooden spoon in her hand and a smile on her face. "Quiet," I said. She nodded and turned back to the stove. 2 mornings later, I opened my desk drawer to retrieve a pen and stopped moving entirely. Margaret's recipe notebook had shifted, 3 inches to the left of where I had placed it, 3 inches from where it had lived in that drawer for 40 years. My hand gripped the edge of the desk so hard the wood pressed white marks into my palm. My eyes stung hot and sudden, and something cracked open in the center of my chest. Not anger, not yet, but the particular grief of watching someone desecrate something sacred and being unable to say a single word about it. I stood there gripping that desk until I could breathe evenly again. Then I took the notebook out, held it for a moment with both hands, and placed it back exactly where it belonged. I stood at my desk for a long time, with Margaret's recipe notebook held in both hands, not reading it, not opening it, just holding it the way you hold something that belongs to a person who is no longer there to hold it themselves carefully, with the specific tenderness reserved for objects that have absorbed years of someone's touch and somehow retained it. The notebook was soft with age. The blue cover had faded unevenly darker at the spine, where Margaret's thumb had rested every time she opened it. I could see the faint impressions of her handwriting. Through the cover, the loops of her capital letters pressing through from the inside pages like a voice speaking through a wall. I placed it back in the drawer, right side, 1 finger width from the edge. Then I walked out of the study down the hallway and into the bathroom. I ran the cold water and pressed both hands flat against the edge of the sink and looked at my own face in the mirror. It was not a comforting sight. I looked older than I felt, which is something that begins happening to a man in his 60s and accelerates without mercy. My eyes were red at the rims. The lines around my mouth had deepened in the months since Margaret died, settling in. The way grief settles not loudly, but permanently rearranging the architecture of your face until the person looking back at you in the mirror is recognizably yourself, but also somehow a later edition revised and marked by things the earlier version hadn't yet survived. And standing there looking at that face, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel since this began. Doubt. Not about Michael, not about Rebecca, about myself. What if I had moved the notebook? What if the strain of these past months had done something to my recall that I wasn't equipped to perceive from the inside? I had read enough case files over the years to know that cognitive decline rarely announces itself clearly to the person experiencing it. It presents as certainty. It presents as the absolute conviction that you are correct and everyone else is mistaken. My hands tightened on the edge of the sink until my knuckles ached. What if Rebecca was right? The thought landed in my chest like something cold and heavy. And for the space of perhaps 30 seconds, I stood there and let it sit there and felt the full weight of it. 71 years old, alone. A house full of memories, and a daughter who kept looking at me with that practiced sorrowful expression. What if I had built an investigation out of nothing because I needed something to investigate? What if the grief had done what grief sometimes does and bent the world around itself until everything looked like evidence of something sinister? I turned off the cold water. I walked out of the bathroom and down the hall to the living room, and I sat down in the chair by the window. Margaret's chair. I had not sat in it since she died. It felt like a boundary I had established, without consciously deciding to. This chair stays hers, this space stays hers, this much, at least I can preserve. But I sat in it now, and I placed my hands on the armrests where her hands had rested, and I looked out the window at the garden the way she had looked out at it every Sunday morning for 28 years. The roses were still holding on along the back fence, pale and sparse now, the last survivors of the season, but still there. I sat in that chair, and I breathed, and after a while, I heard her voice. The way I sometimes do, not literally not in any way I would try to explain to another person, but in the particular interior register that belongs to people we have known long enough and loved deeply enough that their perspective becomes indistinguishable from our own conscience. Tom, trust what you see, not what they tell you that you saw. She had said it to me the first time, during a case in 2003, a complicated insurance fraud, in which the suspect's lawyer had spent 3 days methodically dismantling my confidence in my own observations. I had come home shaken, and Margaret had listened to the whole thing over dinner, and then she had said those words with the calm certainty of someone who had already made up her mind. I had won that case. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. I opened the photos I had taken 3 nights ago. The desk drawer, the notebook positioned in its correct place, the timestamp visible in the corner of the image. I looked at the photo. I looked at the drawer. The notebook in the photo sat 1 finger width from the right edge of the drawer. The notebook, as I had just replaced it, sat 1 finger width from the right edge of the drawer. Before I had replaced it, it had been sitting 3 inches to the left. I had not moved it. My photographs proved I had not moved it. My 35 years of training told me I had not moved it. And Margaret's voice, steady and clear, in that interior register where her certainty had always lived, told me I had not moved it. I put the phone back in my pocket. I pressed my palms flat against the armrests of Margaret's chair and pushed myself to my feet. My jaw was set. My hands were steady. The doubt that had pressed itself against my ribs for those 30 terrible seconds had burned away and left behind something harder and quieter and considerably more useful. I walked to my desk, opened the green notebook, and wrote down the date and time and the exact displacement of the recipe notebook. 3 inches left, verified by photograph, not by me. Then I picked up my phone and called Patrick. "I need to talk to Laura Mitchell," I said when he answered. "Tonight, if possible." Patrick didn't ask why. After 40 years of friendship, he rarely needed to. "I'll call her now," he said. "Tom, are you all right?" I looked out the window at Margaret's roses, pale and stubborn against the November cold, still refusing to give up the last of the season. "I'm better than all right," I said. "I just remembered who I am." Laura Mitchell's office was on the 2nd floor of a narrow brick building on Brand Boulevard in Glendale, up a staircase that creaked on every other step and smelled faintly of old coffee and printer ink. There was no receptionist. There was no waiting room. There was a frosted glass door with her name stenciled on it in plain black letters, and when I knocked, she opened it herself within 4 seconds. She was 39 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested function rather than style, and the kind of steady, unhurried eyes that come from spending years watching people who don't know they're being watched. She shook my hand once firmly and stepped back to let me in. "Patrick told me the broad strokes," she said, settling into the chair behind her desk and gesturing toward the one across from it. "Tell me the rest yourself. Start from the beginning and don't edit." I told her everything. I started with Rebecca's phone call 3 days after Margaret's funeral and ended with the photograph of the recipe notebook on my phone. I did not rush, and I did not soften any of it. Laura listened the way serious investigators listen, without interrupting, without nodding encouragement, without performing sympathy. She made notes in a small spiral-bound pad with a mechanical pencil, and her eyes stayed on me the whole time, reading my face the way I had spent decades reading other people's. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Walker, what you're describing has a legal name in California. It's called elder financial abuse combined with undue influence. When it involves deliberately fabricating evidence to support a conservatorship petition, it becomes a felony." "Walk me through the conservatorship piece," I said. "Precisely." Laura set down her pencil. "Under California, probate code. Section 1801. A person can petition the court to be appointed conservator of another person's estate, meaning they take over legal control of that person's finances, property, and major life decisions. To succeed, they have to convince a judge that the subject of the petition lacks the capacity to manage their own affairs." She paused. "The standard of proof is lower than you might expect. A credible medical report and a pattern of documented concerning behavior can be enough to get a temporary conservatorship in place while the full hearing is scheduled. Once a temporary order is in, the conservator can begin making financial decisions immediately." The word temporary landed in my stomach like a stone. "Including selling property," I said. "Including selling property," Laura confirmed. Her voice was flat and informational and utterly without comfort, which I found paradoxically more reassuring than any amount of reassurance would have been. The video library they've been building, what they're calling their evidence file, that's exactly what gets submitted to support the petition. Carefully selected moments showing confusion, disorientation, inability to manage daily tasks, with the parts that show how those moments were manufactured left out. "They cut the footage," I said. "Every clip in that folder is missing its beginning." Laura's eyes sharpened slightly. "You've seen inside the folder. The camera system pulled data to a cloud account during the police visit. I had Patrick subpoena the access logs." I looked at her. "I know what they've built. I need to know what they haven't built yet, and I need to know what we can use." For the first time, something that wasn't quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood crossed Laura's face. "Patrick said you were good at this," she said. "Patrick is generous," I said. "What do we do?" She laid it out cleanly and without unnecessary preamble. Tomorrow morning, when Rebecca and Michael were out of the house, she would come in with signal detection equipment and sweep every room. If there were additional surveillance devices beyond the security system, hidden cameras, audio recorders, anything transmitting data, she would find them. She had done it 47 times in cases similar to this one, and she had never missed a device yet. "I need them out of the house for at least 90 minutes, she said. "Can you manage that?" "I can manage it," I said. I had already been thinking about this on the drive over. Rebecca has been trying to get me to try a specialty grocery on Huntington Drive in Arcadia. I'll tell her I'm finally ready. I'll make a list long enough that she'll need Michael to drive. She'll want the larger car for the bags. I paused. "I'll put things on the list that require going to 2 separate stores. That buys 2 hours minimum." Laura looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized, the particular look of someone reassessing an assumption they had made too quickly. "Most of my clients," she said carefully, "need me to explain why that kind of thing works." "I spent 35 years on the other side of it," I said. She nodded once. "Then you already know that the most important thing right now is that they continue to believe they're in control of this situation." "They believe it," I said. "I've been careful." "Good." She picked up her pencil again. "Keep being careful. Don't change anything in your behavior. Don't look at the smoke detector in your bedroom any differently than you look at any other fixture in the house." She watched my face as she said it. "You already found something, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. "I heard a click," I said, "from the ceiling above my bed, twice, 3 nights ago. Laura's jaw tightened, the first physical sign of emotion she had shown since I arrived. Her pencil moved quickly across the notepad. "Don't touch it," she said, her voice dropping half a register and gaining a new edge. "Don't look at it directly. Don't change your sleeping position or your routine in any way. If they're watching the feed from that device and they see you look at the ceiling differently than you did last week, they'll know." I finished. "I know, I haven't touched it." She looked at me steadily for a long moment. Then she said, "Mr. Walker, in 11 years of this work, I have had exactly 3 clients who came to me with the discipline not to pull the device out of the wall the moment they found it." She made another note. "You're the 4th. I drove home through the Glendale streets in the dark, past the lit windows of houses where ordinary evenings were happening behind ordinary curtains. When I pulled into the driveway on Oak Knoll, the downstairs lights were on. Through the kitchen window, I could see Rebecca moving between the counter and the stove. I sat in the car for a moment before going in. Through the window, my daughter moved around Margaret's kitchen with the ease of someone who had grown comfortable in a space that didn't belong to her. She reached up to the cabinet where Margaret had kept the good glasses, the ones we only used for company, and took down 2. My chest ached with the particular combination of love and grief and fury that I had not yet found a word for and suspected I never would. I got out of the car, walked to the front door, and went inside. "There you are," Rebecca said, turning from the stove with a warm smile. "I made pasta, your favorite." "Thank you," I said. "That sounds wonderful." I hung up my jacket. I went to the kitchen drawer and found a notepad and a pen. "I've been thinking," I said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "I'd like to try that specialty grocery in Arcadia you mentioned, the one with the Italian imports." I pushed the notepad across to her. "I was hoping you and Michael might take me tomorrow morning. I have a fairly long list." Rebecca's face lit up with a delight so genuine-looking that for a half-second my chest clenched with something I almost mistook for doubt. "Of course, Dad," she said, and she was already reaching for the pen. "I'll ask Michael tonight. We'll make a whole morning of it." "Perfect," I said. I looked down at the blank notepad in front of me and thought 90 minutes. Laura would have 90 minutes, and whatever she found in those 90 minutes would determine everything that came next. Before we go any further, comment the number 11 right now so I know you're still with me. Because what Thomas is about to find hidden inside his own home will change everything you thought you understood about this family story. 5 devices, every room, and a folder with a name that will make your blood run cold. Note portions of this story include fictional elements for storytelling. Purposes, names, places, and some details have been shaped for your understanding. If that's not for you, it's okay to step away now. Rebecca left the house at 8:15 the next morning, wearing a light jacket and carrying a reusable shopping bag, with Michael behind her, jingling his car keys against his palm. I had given them a list that covered 2 pages, specific brands, specific quantities. 2 items that could only be found at a second store on Baldwin Avenue, and I had watched from the kitchen window as Michael loaded the bags into the back of their SUV with the cheerful efficiency of a man who believed the morning was going exactly as planned. He was not wrong. It was going exactly as planned, just not his plan. I waited until their car had turned the corner at the end of Oak Knoll and disappeared before I picked up my phone and sent Laura Mitchell a single word: clear. She arrived 7 minutes later in a gray Honda that she parked 2 houses down, carrying what appeared to be a laptop bag and a canvas tote that clinked softly when she set it on my kitchen table. She unzipped the tote without ceremony and began removing equipment: a handheld RF signal detector, a non-linear junction detector about the size of a large flashlight, and a tablet connected wirelessly to a receiver she clipped to her belt. "The RF detector finds active transmitters," she said, already moving toward the hallway. "The NLJD finds passive devices, cameras that aren't currently broadcasting but contain electronic components. Between the 2, we cover everything." She paused at the threshold of the living room and looked back at me. "Stay close. If I find something, I need you to see exactly where it is before I document it. You're the homeowner. Your testimony matters." "Understood," I said. She worked with the focused, unhurried efficiency of someone who has done a thing so many times that it has become a form of muscle memory. She moved in overlapping patterns, not random sweeps, but deliberate grids covering every surface, every fixture, every object, large enough to conceal a lens, smaller than a pencil eraser. The living room clock yielded the second camera. Laura ran the NLJD across the clock face, and the detector emitted a sharp ascending tone that made my stomach lurch sideways. She leaned in close, examined the clock's decorative bezel with a penlight, and found a pinhole aperture behind the Roman numeral 3, barely visible, perfectly positioned, to cover the couch where I read the morning paper every day. "Document this," she said quietly, and I took out my phone and photographed it from 3 angles while Laura made notes in her pad. The third camera was in the ventilation grate of my study, aimed directly at my desk, at the spot where I reviewed financial documents and kept my personal files. The fourth was embedded in the underside of a kitchen shelf, angled toward the table where I ate every meal alone and occasionally sorted through the mail. The fifth was near the medicine cabinet in the hallway bathroom, positioned to capture anyone opening the cabinet, which is where I kept my prescription medications and the contact information for my bank and my attorney. By the time Laura found the 5th device, my hands were not entirely steady. I pressed them flat against my thighs and kept my breathing even, and did not allow myself to think about how many mornings I had sat at that kitchen table or stood at that bathroom cabinet completely unaware that I was being recorded, cataloged, filed away in a folder, labeled with the word that was now permanently burned into my understanding of what my daughter and her husband had planned for me. Laura called Patrick from my kitchen. Within 40 minutes, 2 detectives from the Pasadena Police Department arrived with a warrant that Patrick had been quietly preparing for the past 72 hours. He had begun the application 3 days earlier based on the secondary admin account Caleb had identified, and the 12 seconds of recovered footage enough, he said, to establish probable cause for a search of the property's network and recording infrastructure. What Laura found this morning had given him everything he needed to execute it. The detectives documented every device. They photographed the router hidden behind the bookcase in the hallway, a secondary unit not connected to my home network, running its own private signal that transmitted data to an off-site storage account. The login credentials used a disposable email address, but the account recovery phone number was a working cell number registered to Michael Harlow. One of the detectives, a woman named Chen, who had the efficient no-excess manner of someone perpetually short on time, looked at the router and then at me. "Mr. Walker, how long have you been in this house?" 28 years, I said. She made a note. "And you did not install this router?" "I have never seen that router before in my life," I said. She nodded and kept writing. The data extraction took 2 hours. While the detectives worked, I sat in Margaret's chair in the living room and looked out at the garden and tried to keep my mind from running ahead to what was on those storage drives. I wasn't entirely successful. When the lead detective came to find me, he carried a tablet showing the folder structure of the off-site account. There were hundreds of folders, each labeled with a date, and at the top of the directory, separated from the daily folders by a blank line, was a single folder in bold, conservatorship evidence. The detective turned the tablet so I could read it clearly. "Mr. Walker," he said, with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned to deliver difficult information without editorializing, "we're going to need to go through this with you. There's quite a bit of material." I looked at the folder name on the screen. 2 words. My daughter had named a folder after the legal mechanism she intended to use to take my life away from me, and she had filled it apparently with months of carefully selected recordings designed to make that argument in court. My jaw tightened until I felt it in the back of my skull. My throat worked around something that had no business being in a room full of law enforcement professionals, and for a moment, just a moment, my eyes burned so badly I had to look away from the screen and fix my gaze on the roses along the back fence until the burning passed. "Yes," I said when I could trust my voice again. "I'd like to see all of it." The detective nodded. "There's one more thing," he said. He swiped to a different folder on the tablet. "We found an audio file from the night of what appears to be a staged incident." He looked at me carefully. "The date stamp matches the night your daughter reported a possible intruder." My chest went very still. "We can play it here," he said, "or we can wait until you're at the station with your attorney present." I looked at the tablet in his hands. I thought about the way Rebecca's voice had sounded at the bottom of those stairs, high and cracked, and frightened the performance of a lifetime delivered in 37 seconds. "At the station," I said, "with Patrick." The detective closed the tablet. "We'll set it up for this afternoon." Before they left, 2 technicians spent 40 minutes installing audio recording equipment in the kitchen, the living room, and the hallway, all 3 common areas of the house. The installation was authorized under the same warrant that had covered the camera search. Detective Reyes explained it simply. Anything said in those rooms, from this point forward, would be recorded legally and admissible in court. Michael and Rebecca would have no way of knowing. I heard Rebecca's car pull into the driveway at 10:43. The detectives had finished and gone. Laura had gone. The house looked exactly the way it had when Rebecca and Michael left 2 hours ago. I was sitting at the kitchen table when they came through the door loaded with grocery bags and the easy, self-satisfied energy of people who believed the morning had gone smoothly. "We got everything on the list," Rebecca announced, setting 2 heavy bags on the counter and turning to smile at me. "And the woman at the Italian place gave us a sample of this incredible olive oil. I think you're going to love it, Dad." "That sounds wonderful," I said. She began unpacking the bags, humming something soft and tuneless under her breath, her back to me. Michael set his bags down and poured himself a glass of water from the tap, leaning against the counter with his ankles crossed. I looked at the two of them moving around Margaret's kitchen. My hands were flat on the table in front of me. My face gave away nothing at all. In 4 hours, I would sit in a room at the Pasadena Police Department and hear my daughter's voice plan the worst thing she had ever done. But right now, I reached across the table and picked up the small bottle of olive oil Rebecca had set beside me, turned it over in my hands and said, "This is a beautiful label. Thank you for thinking of me." The Pasadena Police Department interview room was smaller than I expected and colder than it needed to be. The particular institutional chill of a space where the temperature is kept low enough to keep people alert and uncomfortable in equal measure. I had been in rooms like this hundreds of times over the course of my career, always on the side of the table closest to the door. Sitting on the other side felt different in a way I hadn't anticipated. Patrick was beside me, his reading glasses already on a yellow legal pad open in front of him. The lead detective, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Reyes, who moved with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who has stopped being surprised by anything, set a laptop on the table between us and adjusted the external speaker. "Before we play this," Reyes said, "I want to clarify something for the record. Mr. Walker, you are the sole owner of the property at Oak Knoll Drive. The recording devices found on your property were installed without your knowledge or consent. Is that correct?" "That is correct," I said. "Under California Penal Code, Section 632, the installation of covert recording devices in a private residence without the consent of the owner constitutes illegal surveillance. California law generally requires all parties to consent before a conversation can be recorded. However, that consent requirement applies to lawfully installed equipment. When the recording device itself is evidence of a crime, when it was placed without authorization, as part of an ongoing criminal scheme, the recordings it captured are admissible as evidence of that scheme. Because these devices were installed in your home without your knowledge or consent, every recording they made is a record of the crime of their installation and of any criminal conduct documented in the process." He paused. "I want you to understand what you're about to hear before you hear it." "I understand," I said. Patrick put his hand briefly on my forearm, just once, just for a second. Then he took it away and picked up his pen. Reyes pressed play. The audio quality was better than I expected. The kitchen camera had a microphone sensitive enough to pick up not just voices, but the ambient sounds of the room, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock above the stove, the creak of a kitchen chair being pulled across tile. The timestamp on the file read 2:54 a.m. Michael's voice came through the speaker first, and the steadiness of it, the complete businesslike calm, hit me somewhere below the ribs, like a fist I hadn't seen coming. "When I cut the camera feed, you count to 40, then you scream. Don't start before 40. I need time to get through the back gate and into position." A pause. Rebecca's voice lower, tighter. "What if he comes downstairs while you're still outside?" "He won't. He sleeps until at least 3:15 on a normal night. I've been watching the feed for 6 weeks. Michael's voice was patient in the way that a person is patient when they are explaining something simple to someone who is unnecessarily nervous. "The whole point is that he hears the sound from outside first before you scream. When the police ask him what happened, he'll say he heard something in the yard and then heard you scream. His words, not ours." "And if it doesn't work?" Rebecca asked. "If the police don't put it in the report the way we need, then we do it again," Michael said. "And again after that if necessary. Every incident goes in the file. Every police report that mentions him reporting things that weren't there adds to the pattern. A chair moved, footsteps on tile. After 4 or 5 incidents, we have a documented history. We have a doctor's report. We have 6 weeks of footage showing him confused and agitated. His voice dropped slightly, not from emotion, but from the practical caution of a man reviewing a checklist. By the time the conservatorship petition goes before a judge, it won't even be a close call. Another pause, longer this time. Then Rebecca said very quietly, "What if he figures it out?" Michael's answer came without hesitation, without the smallest tremor of uncertainty. He's 71 years old, and he just lost his wife. He's lonely, and he's grieving, and he wants to believe we're here because we love him. A brief, flat pause. We give him things to doubt about himself, and he'll do the rest on his own. He only sees what we want him to see. That's how this works. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Then came the sound of the back door opening, and Michael's footsteps crossing the patio, and then 37 seconds of near silence broken only by Rebecca's breathing, rapid, controlled, a person preparing, and then her voice transformed, completely shattering the quiet of the house with a fear that sounded utterly, devastatingly real. "Dad! Dad, there's someone in the house!" Reyes reached forward and stopped the playback. The room was not quiet. The refrigerator in the break room down the hall was audible through the wall. Someone's phone buzzed on a desk somewhere. The fluorescent light above us hummed at a frequency that seemed in that moment very loud. I became aware that my hands, which had been flat on the table, had curled inward. Not into fists. I didn't have the energy for fury right now, not yet. They had just closed the way hands do when the body is trying to hold on to something, and finding nothing there. Patrick's pen had stopped moving. He was looking at the table. "Mr. Walker," Reyes said, "are you all right?" I opened my hands and pressed them flat again. "Play the rest of it," I said. Reyes looked at Patrick. Patrick looked at me. Neither of them argued. The recording continued, Michael returning through the back door, the rustle of the pharmacy bag, his voice slipping back into its easy, concerned register as he asked Rebecca what happened. And then my own voice coming through the speaker in a way that made the hair on my arm stand up, because I had forgotten I was being recorded too, asking questions, searching the house, saying the things that an old man says when he believes his daughter is frightened. And underneath it all, underneath every word I said in that recording, I could hear now what I hadn't been able to hear in the moment, the structure of it, the scaffolding, the way Michael's answers arrived precisely 1 beat faster than genuine surprise would allow. The way Rebecca's breathing steadied itself 5 seconds after she stopped screaming, not gradually, the way real fear dissipates, but in a single clean transition, like a switch being thrown. I had spent 35 years listening to recordings of people lying. I had never heard anyone lie about me before. When the audio finished, I sat with it for a moment. My chest felt hollowed out, and then slowly refilled with something that was not grief and not anger, but some compound of the two that I didn't have a name for and suspected was going to take a long time to metabolize. "Mr. Walker," Reyes's voice was even and professional and not unkind. "I want to explain where we are legally. What we have is significant. The audio establishes premeditation and conspiracy. The surveillance devices establish criminal invasion of privacy under California Penal Code 632. The fabricated police report, combined with the evidence file they were building, establishes the framework for a conservatorship fraud charge under Probate Code 1801. He paused. "But here's what we don't have yet. We have everything up to the planning stage. To make this case as strong as it needs to be, we need them to take the final step. We need documented evidence of the actual attempt to transfer control of your assets." I looked at him steadily. "You want them to try. We want them to complete the attempt," he said, "with full documentation of every step." Patrick leaned forward. "Tom, what Detective Reyes is describing is a controlled scenario. You continue as you have been. We continue gathering evidence. When they make their move, when they bring you papers to sign, that's when we act." He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Can you keep doing what you've been doing?" I thought about Rebecca's voice at the bottom of those stairs, the complete practice terror of it, the 37 seconds of silence before it that I now understood in a way I hadn't 24 hours ago. I thought about Michael's voice in the kitchen at 2:54 in the morning, patient and methodical, explaining how to make a 71-year-old man doubt his own mind. I thought about Margaret's recipe notebook sitting in its drawer on Oak Knoll Drive, 1 finger width from the right edge exactly where it belonged. Yes, I said. I can keep doing what I've been doing. Reyes nodded. He closed the laptop. Then we'll be in touch about next steps. He stood and offered his hand. Mr. Walker, I want you to know in 18 years on this job, I have seen a lot of elder financial abuse cases. Most of them, the family gets away with it because the victim either doesn't notice or can't prove it. He held my gaze. You noticed, and you proved it. I shook his hand. Patrick and I walked out of the station into the thin November afternoon, the sun already low behind the San Gabriel Mountains, the air carrying the particular clarity that comes to Southern California in late fall when the Santa Ana winds have passed through and taken the haze with them. We stood beside our cars in the parking lot. How are you? Patrick asked. I looked up at the mountains for a moment. The peaks were sharp and pale against the blue sky, the way they get in November when the air is clean. I heard my daughter plan the worst thing she has ever done, I said, in her own voice, in my kitchen, while I was asleep upstairs. Patrick didn't offer comfort because he knew me well enough to know I didn't want it. He just stood there, which was exactly the right thing. What do I do now? I said. Now, Patrick said, you go home, you make dinner, you act exactly the way you have been acting. He put on his reading glasses even though there was nothing to read. Another old habit. And you wait. I drove home through the amber late afternoon light. When I pulled into the driveway, Rebecca was in the garden, kneeling beside the rose bed, along the back fence, wearing Margaret's old gardening gloves, the ones with the yellow daisies on the cuffs that had hung on the hook by the back door for 3 years untouched. She was pulling weeds from between the rose roots carefully, the way Margaret had always done it, her head bent and her hands working steadily in the last of the afternoon sun. My throat closed around something I could not afford to say. I got out of the car. I waved. She looked up and smiled and waved back, and her face in that moment, open and warm and wearing her mother's gardening gloves, was the most painful thing I had looked at in a very long time. I went inside and started making dinner. That night, after Rebecca and Michael had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink, and the kind of quiet that has weight to it. The house made its ordinary sounds around me. The refrigerator cycled on and off. The wind moved through the orange trees along the side path, producing a low, papery rustling that I had listened to on 10,000 evenings and never once found ominous until now. The clock above the stove read 11:47. I sat there and I thought about Michael's voice coming through that speaker in the police interview room, the patience of it, the complete architectural calm of a man laying out a plan he had thought through from every angle and found satisfying. He had been watching the camera feed for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of my mornings, my evenings, my solitary dinners, and my sleepless nights, and the private grief of a man learning to live in a house that used to contain 2 people and now contained 1. He had watched all of it, cataloged all of it, and concluded that what he was watching was exploitable. I picked up the tea, found it had gone cold, and set it back down. Then I thought about what came next. Patrick had been clear. Reyes had been clear. Laura had been clear. The case they were building was strong, but not yet complete. To bring charges that would hold up in a California Superior Court, charges serious enough to result in meaningful consequences, not a fine and a suspended sentence and a civil settlement, that left Rebecca and Michael free to try this again. On someone else, they needed the final step. They needed documentation of the actual attempt to transfer control of my assets, which meant I had to make them comfortable enough to take it. I had spent 35 years making subjects comfortable enough to incriminate themselves. I had done it through patience and careful observation and the disciplined suppression of every instinct that said, move, now, confront, now, end this, now. I had done it in cases far simpler than this one and in cases far more complex. I had done it when I was 32 years old and certain I knew everything, and when I was 65 and certain I knew somewhat less. I had never done it in my own kitchen with the people I was investigating, sleeping 15 feet below me. I pushed the cold tea aside. I opened the green notebook to a fresh page and wrote in the shorthand I had used for 35 years, a single line, begin tomorrow. Slow and gradual. 1 detail per day, no more. Make it look like progression, not performance. Then I went to bed. The performance began the following Tuesday. At breakfast, I asked Rebecca what day it was. She told me it was Tuesday, and I nodded and thanked her. And then 40 minutes later, while she was washing dishes, I asked her again. She turned from the sink with water still on her hands and looked at me with an expression that moved through several registers under a second surprise, then something quickly suppressed, then the familiar soft concern that she wore like a second skin. "It's still Tuesday, Dad," she said gently. "Of course it is," I said, and let a small frown cross my face. "I don't know where my mind has been lately." She dried her hands on the dish towel and came to sit beside me, and she put her arm around my shoulders, and she said, "You don't have to apologize for that. You've been through so much." Her arm around my shoulders felt exactly the way a daughter's arm should feel. My chest ached with the specific pain of things that are simultaneously true and false. She was my daughter. She did love me in some version of the way daughters love fathers, and she was also sitting beside me, calculating how useful my apparent confusion was to a plan that would end with me losing everything Margaret and I had built together. I leaned into her slightly the way a tired old man leans, and I said, "What would I do without you?" She hugged me tighter. Over her shoulder through the kitchen doorway, I could see Michael standing in the hallway with his coffee mug watching us. His eyes were bright with the particular alertness of a man watching something go right. Over the following days, I added details the way a painter adds layers thin, careful each one drying before the next was applied. I wrote a doctor's appointment in the wrong week in my calendar and let Rebecca find it and gently correct me. I asked Michael twice in one afternoon whether the back gate had been fixed, and both times let his answer land on me with a slight delay, as though it had to travel a longer distance than usual to reach whatever part of my brain was supposed to receive it. I stood in the kitchen one morning for 4 minutes, apparently unable to remember why I'd come in there, until Rebecca appeared and asked if I was looking for something. "I'm not sure," I said, and the look that crossed her face when I said it was a thing I will carry for the rest of my life. I was not proud of any of it, but I was thorough. The microphones the police had installed in the common areas of the house were active throughout. Patrick received the transcripts daily. Reyes reviewed them. Laura reviewed them. And I reviewed them in the evenings alone at my desk, reading the documented evidence of my daughter and her husband, growing more confident with each passing day. It was on a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week of December, shortly after 9 o'clock, that I heard the conversation I had been waiting for. I was in my study with the door partially open, a position I had maintained every evening since the microphones were installed, because the acoustics of the house meant that voices in the living room carried clearly down the hallway when the television was off. Rebecca and Michael thought I had gone to bed early. I was sitting in the dark at my desk with my reading glasses off listening. "He's ready," Rebecca said. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard in it before, a tautness like a rope being drawn toward its final tension. "The doctor said he's showing clear progression." "Holt," Michael said, not a question. "No." A pause. "Holt won't sign anything. I told you that weeks ago." Another pause longer. "I've been talking to someone else, Warren in Arcadia. He's willing to do an assessment and write the report we need." Michael's voice dropped half a register, not from caution, but from the particular tone of a man doing arithmetic. "What does he want?" 20,000, Rebecca said. "After the petition goes through." The word petition landed in the hallway and traveled to my desk and pressed itself against my ribs like something cold. "Does he understand the timeline?" Michael asked. "He understands everything," Rebecca said. "His brother lost money in your Riverside project. He's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart." A brief sound, a short exhale, almost a laugh, but not quite. "After the estate transfers, we pay Warren, we clear the Glendale debt, and we get back in before the market turns." Her voice shifted again, quieter and more compressed, the voice she used when she was thinking, rather than planning. "We just need the house to sell fast. Michael, if we price it right, we can have an offer in 2 weeks." There was a silence that I filled in my head with the image of Margaret's roses along the back fence. "I know someone," Michael said. "Investor out of Beverly Hills. He'll move fast if the price is right." A pause. "We don't need to get full market value. We need to get enough." I sat in the dark and I breathed. My hands were flat on the desk, completely still. Because the thing about 35 years of this work is that there comes a moment in every case when the evidence stops being abstract and becomes real in a way that hits the body before it hits the mind, when the thing you suspected becomes the thing you know. When the architecture of the lie becomes visible all at once, every beam and joint and load-bearing wall of it exposed and undeniable. This was that moment. They were going to sell Margaret's house for less than it was worth, because speed mattered more to them than value. and they were going to use the money to pay a bribed doctor and clear gambling debts and buy back into a stock market that had already taken everything they had, and they were going to do all of this while I sat 15 feet away in the dark and listened. I let out one slow breath, then I opened the notebook and began to write. The following morning, I called Patrick. "I have everything we need," I said when he answered. A pause. Then Patrick said very quietly, "Tell me." Patrick's office on Colorado Boulevard felt different that morning. It was the same room, same leather chairs, same shelves of case binders, same frame photograph of the San Gabriel Valley taken from somewhere up in the foothills that had hung behind his desk for as long as I could remember. But there was a third person in it, sitting in the chair to Patrick's right with a leather portfolio open on her knees, and the alert, contained posture of someone who is very good at their job and has learned not to advertise it unnecessarily. Agent Carol Simmons was 45 years old, with close-cropped brown hair and the kind of direct, unhurried gaze that belongs to people who ask questions for a living. She worked for the California Department of Justice Bureau of Medi-Cal Fraud and Elder Abuse out of the Los Angeles field office, and she had been doing it for 11 years. She stood when I came in and shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I've reviewed everything Patrick sent me. I want you to know that what you've documented here is among the most thoroughly prepared elder abuse cases I've seen come across my desk. And I've seen a great many." I sat down. "What does that mean for where we are?" She opened her portfolio. "It means we're close, but close isn't finished." She set several pages on the coffee table between us, printed transcripts flagged with colored tabs. The audio recording establishes conspiracy and premeditation. The surveillance devices establish criminal invasion of privacy under California Penal Code 632. The evidence folder on the offsite server establishes the fraudulent conservatorship framework. She tapped the third page. "What we've been working on since Patrick contacted us 3 days ago is the financial corruption piece." "Warren," I said. "Warren," she confirmed. "Dr. Raymond Warren, licensed physician in Arcadia. We subpoenaed his email server through the Los Angeles Superior Court 2 days ago." She slid a printed page across the coffee table toward me. "This arrived in his inbox 9 days ago from an account registered to Michael Harlow." I picked up the page. The email was brief, 4 sentences. Michael's language was careful, no explicit mention of money, no explicit mention of a report. But the meaning was impossible to misread. He referenced a previous conversation, mentioned that their arrangement remained on track, and said that the figure they had discussed would be available within 30 days of what he called the completion of the family matter. 4 sentences. Enough. "Is this sufficient?" I asked. "Combined with everything else, yes," Simmons said. "We also found something else." She produced a second page. Patrick ran a background check on Warren's professional associations. His younger brother, Dennis Warren, was an investor in a commercial real estate project in Riverside County. The project was managed by Harlow Development Group. I looked up from the page. "Michael's company?" "The project failed in 2021, Simmons said. Dennis Warren lost approximately $90,000. Raymond Warren has never publicly associated himself with that loss, but the connection exists, and it establishes a prior relationship between the Warren family and Michael Harlow that predates any legitimate medical referral." She paused. "In other words, Dr. Warren didn't respond to a cold approach from a stranger. He responded to a call from someone his family already had reason to resent and reason to want something from." Patrick leaned forward. "Tom, what Agent Simmons is describing is a bribery charge under California Penal Code, Section 67.5, offering compensation to a non-executive officer to perform a corrupt act. Combined with the false medical report Warren is about to produce, we're also looking at charges under the Business and Professions Code for falsification of medical records." "About to produce," I said. "He hasn't written it yet." "Rebecca made the appointment for this Thursday," Simmons said. "We want him to write it. We want that report in existence signed and dated before we move." She looked at me steadily. "Can you attend the appointment and complete the assessment without giving anything away?" I thought about the 90 minutes I had spent in Dr. Holt's office in November, the tests I had completed, the words I had recalled in sequence, the clock I had drawn, with the hands precisely positioned. I thought about what it would require to do the opposite of all that, deliberately, in front of a man who had already been paid to reach a predetermined conclusion. "Yes," I said, "I can do that." Simmons made a note. "Don't overdo it," she said. "Warren's report will be more credible if it reflects a mild to moderate presentation rather than a dramatic one. He's a physician, he'll be suspicious of anything that looks performed." She glanced up. "Forget one or two of the words on the recall list. Get the clock slightly wrong, maybe the minute hand off by one position. Express some uncertainty about the current date." She paused. "Nothing dramatic, just enough." "And just enough," I repeated. She nodded. "We'll have a detective in the waiting room during the appointment. His role is to document that the assessment took place, to observe Warren's conduct, and to take custody of the report the moment it is submitted, establishing an unbroken chain of evidence from Warren's hand to the court record. When that report exists, signed and dated, it becomes the final piece we need. At that point, we have everything we need to move forward with criminal charges against both Rebecca and Michael, and to refer Warren to the medical board for license revocation." I sat with that for a moment. The morning light came through the window behind Patrick's desk and fell across the floor in the same long yellow rectangles it always made at this hour, in this room, in this city that had been mine for nearly 3 decades. "There's one more step," Patrick said. "We need them to bring you the papers." "The conservatorship petition documents," I said, "and the power of attorney." He picked up his own copy of the page. "When Rebecca asks you to sign, you agree. You tell her you want to do it at my office, that it makes you feel more comfortable to have a familiar space, a familiar face." He looked at me over his reading glasses. "They'll agree. They'll think it's a minor concession from a man who has already accepted the situation." "And then," I said. Patrick set the page down. "And then we finish it." The appointment with Dr. Warren happened on a Thursday morning, 2 days later. Rebecca drove me to a medical building on Duarte Road in Arcadia, talking the whole way about how much she trusted this doctor, how highly recommended he was, how this was just a routine follow-up to make sure I was getting the right support. Warren's office was carpeted in beige and smelled of air freshener and something antiseptic underneath it. Warren himself was 58 years old, silver-haired with the practiced warmth of a man who had learned to make patients feel at ease, and was applying the skill now for reasons that had nothing to do with their well-being. He shook my hand. He asked me to sit. He asked Rebecca to wait outside. And then he administered an assessment that bore a surface resemblance to the one Dr. Holt had given me in November, but with a quality of incompleteness to it. Questions that stopped a beat too early. Prompts that guided rather than tested pauses that seemed to invite uncertainty rather than measure it. I gave him what he needed. I hesitated on the 5th word of the recall list bridge and substituted window, instead then corrected myself with the slight effortful frown of a man reaching for something he should know. I drew the clock with the minute hand pointing to the 11 rather than the 12. When he asked me the date, I gave him the correct month, but subtracted 3 days from the number, then looked uncertain when he made a note of it. Warren wrote steadily throughout. His pen moved with the efficient confidence of a man filling in blanks he had already decided on. When it was over, he walked me out to the waiting room himself, his hand briefly on my arm, in a gesture that managed to be both solicitous and proprietary, and he told Rebecca that he would have his report finalized by early next week. Rebecca thanked him with such warm, genuine-seeming gratitude that I watched Warren receive it and straighten slightly the way people do when they are being thanked for something they have not actually done. In the car on the way home, Rebecca reached across and squeezed my hand. "You did so well, Dad," she said, her voice soft with what sounded like relief. "I'm so proud of you." My hand was warm in hers. Outside the window, the San Gabriel Valley moved past in the thin December light, the strip malls and the palm trees and the dry brown hills above the city. Everything familiar and ordinary, and entirely unaware of what was being assembled, piece by careful piece, in the space between what Rebecca believed was happening and what was actually happening. "Thank you for taking care of me," I said. She squeezed my hand again. "Always, Dad, always." I looked out the window and counted the days until this was finished. Warren's report arrived on a Tuesday morning in the 2nd week of January. Patrick called me before 9 o'clock. His voice was measured and precise, the way it always gets when something significant has happened, and he wants to make sure I hear it clearly. "The report is in," he said. Warren concluded mild to moderate cognitive impairment affecting daily functioning and financial decision-making capacity. He recommends immediate conservatorship of both the person and the estate. A pause. "It's well written, Tom. Specific enough to sound clinical, vague enough to be difficult to immediately refute without a counter-assessment from another qualified physician. "Dr. Holt," I said. "Already contacted," Patrick said. She reviewed Warren's report this morning. She called it, and I'm quoting her directly here, the most deliberately misleading document she had seen in 20 years of practice. A brief pause. "She has agreed to testify." I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the garden. The roses had finally given up the last of their season, sometime in December, reduced now to bare canes along the white fence, patient and angular against the January sky. Margaret had always said that was when they looked most like themselves, stripped back, honest, waiting. "When will Rebecca bring the papers?" I asked. "Simmons thinks within the week," Patrick said. "They've been moving faster since Warren submitted. Michael made contact with the Beverly Hills investor 2 days ago. Preliminary conversation, nothing committed yet. But the intent is there." Another pause. "Tom, are you ready?" I watched a mockingbird land on the fence post beside the rose bed, tilt its head at the bare canes, and fly away again. "I've been ready," I said, "for a long time." Rebecca brought the papers on a Friday afternoon. She came into the living room carrying a manila folder pressed against her chest, and she sat beside me on the couch with the careful, deliberate gentleness of someone handling something fragile. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, dark blue, simple, well-fitted. For a moment in the afternoon light coming through the window, something about the color made my chest constrict. Then I recognized it. Not the dress itself, the color, the same deep navy as the dress Margaret had worn in the photograph on the hallway wall, the one taken at our 30th anniversary dinner. The one where she was laughing at something I had said and looking at the camera with the particular happiness of a woman who has arrived after 30 years at exactly the life she wanted. I did not know whether Rebecca had chosen that color deliberately. I did not know whether she had looked at that photograph and made a calculation, or whether it was simply a coincidence that had arranged itself into the shape of a wound. I decided sitting there that it didn't matter. Either way, it landed where it landed. She opened the folder on the coffee table between us. 3 documents, a durable power of attorney, a consent form for conservatorship of the estate, and an authorization to list the property for sale. Each had colored tabs marking the signature lines. Caldwell had arranged, she told me, for a mobile notary to meet us at Patrick's office the following day this afternoon. It was just for me to review everything she said so I wouldn't feel rushed. What she didn't mention was that under California law, a durable power of attorney requires notarization to take effect. She needed me to sign first and ask questions later. "Dad," she said, her voice dropping into that register she reserved for moments she wanted to feel significant. "You just need to sign a few places. I'll take care of everything from here. You won't have to worry about any of it." I looked at the papers. I looked at her. My throat felt the way it feels when you are in cold water and you have to keep your breathing controlled, and even regardless of what the rest of you wants to do. "You won't sell your mother's house," I said, not a question. Her eyes held mine with steady, practiced warmth. "I promise, Dad. I just want you to be safe." I picked up the pen she had placed on the table. Then I set it down. "You know what?" I said. "I'd feel better doing this at Patrick's office, with a notary present. I think it would make me feel more settled." I looked at her with what I hoped was the expression of an old man who needs reassurance rather than a man who has been building toward this moment for 3 months. "Would that be all right?" Something crossed her face, the briefest flicker of impatience pressed down and covered over in under a second. Then she smiled. "Of course, Dad," she said. "Whatever makes you comfortable." She pulled out her phone and called Michael. I heard his voice through the speaker, quick and assured, the voice of a man who has just been told that the last obstacle has agreed to move. I looked at the authorization to sell Margaret's house sitting on the coffee table and thought, one more day. I woke before dawn on Saturday morning, not because of a sound or a dream or any of the usual disruptions that pull a man my age out of sleep. I simply opened my eyes at 5:47 and lay still in the dark and knew with the particular clarity that sometimes comes in the hour before daylight that today was the day this ended. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the January darkness give way to the pale, flat gray of a Southern California winter morning, the kind of light that isn't quite sunrise but is no longer night, a threshold light in between. The roses along the back fence were bare canes still, but the orange trees had fruit on them, small and bright in the gray air, the way they get in January when everything else is pulled back and they're the only color left in the garden. Margaret had loved that. She used to say that January was when you found out what a garden was really made of. I had spoken to Patrick the night before. Everything was in place. Agent Simmons would arrive at his office at 8 o'clock. Laura Mitchell would be there. 2 detectives from the Pasadena Police Department and a deputy from the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. They would enter through the building's service corridor and wait in the secondary conference room, the one that connected to the main room, through a door that looked from the outside like a supply closet. Rebecca and Michael were expecting a notary and 2 chairs. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and set it in the drying rack the way Margaret had always kept it, handle facing out, ready for the next use. Then, I went upstairs to dress. I put on the gray slacks and the white collared shirt I had worn to every significant occasion for the past decade, the same shoes, the same watch the one Margaret had given me for our 40th anniversary with the dark leather strap she had chosen herself, because she said it was serious without being somber. I stood at the mirror and looked at my reflection and felt for the first time in months like I was looking at a man I recognized completely. I heard Rebecca moving downstairs at 7:30. The particular rhythm of her steps in Margaret's kitchen coffee first, then the cabinet where the cereal was kept, then the drawer for a spoon. She had learned the geography of this house so well in 3 months that she moved through it without hesitation. I came downstairs at 7:45. Rebecca was at the kitchen table dressed and composed, with her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. She had done her hair carefully. She was wearing the same dark navy dress she had worn when she brought the papers. I still didn't know when she had gone into Margaret's closet to find it, the closet I hadn't opened since the day after the funeral, the one I had been telling myself I would deal with, eventually. At some point in the past 3 months, Rebecca had gone in there without asking, and seeing that dress a second time in the morning light of a day that had been months in the making, I felt the color hit my chest, the same way it had hit it on Friday, with the same specific pain, the same unwanted recognition. She looked up when I came in and smiled. "Good morning, Dad," she said. "Did you sleep all right?" "Well enough," I said. Michael came through from the hallway a moment later, dressed in a jacket and tie, the most formal I had seen him since the day he moved in. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, and said with the easy warmth he always deployed in the morning, "Big day. How are you feeling, Tom?" "Settled," I said. "I feel settled." He smiled and nodded and drank his coffee and looked to any outside observer like a devoted son-in-law on an ordinary Saturday morning. His jaw was relaxed. His eyes were bright. He checked his phone once briefly with the quickly suppressed satisfaction of a man confirming that the last pieces are in position. We drove to Patrick's office in Michael's car. Rebecca sat beside me in the back seat and kept her hand over mine the whole way, and she talked quietly about nothing in particular. The whether a restaurant on Green Street she wanted to try, something she had read about the Rose Bowl. Her voice was warm and unhurried, and she smelled faintly of the perfume she wore on occasions she considered important. I watched Pasadena move past the window. Colorado Boulevard, in the January morning, the shop fronts and the palm trees and the San Gabriel Mountains visible at the end of every east-west street, clear and closed the way they get in winter when the air has no haze in it. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the 42 years we had lived in this city, and the 28 of those years we had lived on Oak Knoll Drive, and the way she used to say that a place becomes yours, not when you move in, but when you know exactly which way the light falls at every hour of the day. I knew that house the way she had described in my bones and my hands, in the way my feet found the bottom stair in the dark without needing to count. They were going to take it from me today. They believed that completely. I let them believe it all the way to Colorado Boulevard. Patrick's building was a 3-story Spanish colonial on the corner with terracotta roof tiles and a lobby that smelled of old wood and something faintly citrusy the way buildings do in Southern California when they have been there long enough to absorb the weather. The receptionist greeted us and showed us to the main conference room on the 2nd floor. The room was well appointed and impersonal in the way of professional spaces. A long table, 8 leather chairs, a credenza along one wall, and a large flat-screen monitor mounted above it that was currently dark. There was a door on the far wall that I had walked past hundreds of times over decades of meetings in this building without ever paying it particular attention. Today I knew exactly what was behind it. Rebecca's attorney, a trim man in his 40s named Caldwell, who had the clipped efficiency of someone billing by the hour, arranged the documents on the table with practiced speed. 3 stacks each tabbed in a different color. He explained each one in sequence: the durable power of attorney, the conservatorship, consent, the property authorization. clear and organized and entirely aimed at the transfer of everything I owned to the control of two people who had spent 3 months engineering this moment. Rebecca sat beside me. Michael sat across the table, his hands folded in front of him, the picture of patient, loving support. Rebecca put her hand on my arm. "Dad," she said softly, "you don't have to be nervous. This is just paperwork. After today, you don't have to worry about any of it." I looked at the documents on the table. I picked up the pen Caldwell had placed in front of me. My hand was steady, had always been steady, and I signed my name at the bottom of the first page of the durable power of attorney with the same deliberate, unhurried stroke I had used on documents for 50 years. Michael's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Rebecca exhaled a soft, barely there sound, but I heard it the way I had heard every carefully managed breath she had taken in this room for the past 3 months. I set the pen down. "Before we continue," I said, "I'd like to show you both something." The room was very still. I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were on my face, warm and patient, and entirely certain that what was about to happen was what she had spent 3 months arranging. "There's a screen on that wall," I said, "and I've asked Patrick to put something on it." I looked at the dark monitor above the credenza, and then I looked at the door on the far wall, the one that looked like a supply closet, and I said, "Come in, Patrick." Before I tell you what happened inside that conference room, comment "justice" below, so I know you made it this far. Thomas Walker spent 3 months building toward this one morning, a screen on the wall, a door no one expected to open, and 2 people who were absolutely certain they had already won. A note: this story weaves fictional elements into its telling for depth and educational value. Any resemblance to specific individuals or locations is coincidental, but what happens next is something every family should hear. The door opened. Patrick came through, first steady and unhurried. Behind him came Laura Mitchell, then Agent Simmons, then 2 Pasadena detectives, then a deputy from the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. 6 people through a door that had looked like a supply closet into a room where Rebecca and Michael had believed they were 40 feet away from finishing this. Caldwell, their attorney, shoved back from the table so hard his chair hit the credenza. "This is a private legal proceeding," Sir Simmons said without raising her voice. "Sit down." He sat. Rebecca hadn't moved. She was still beside me, but the warmth had dropped out of her face all at once like a light going off. Her eyes moved from Patrick to Simmons to me, and I watched her understand in real time the full shape of what she had walked into. Her hand, still near mine on the table, began to shake. Michael stood up fast, his eyes going immediately to the main door. One of the detectives was already there. Michael looked at the detective. He looked at Simmons. And for the first time in 3 months, the control went out of his face, not all at once, but in layers like a structure losing its load-bearing walls until what remained was something considerably smaller than the man who had sat across from me 30 seconds ago. Patrick connected a cable to the flat-screen monitor above the credenza. The screen came to life. The first image, my back door, 3 a.m., November 14th. Michael's figure moving through the frame key in the locked door, open in under 2 seconds. Then, the kitchen audio, his voice at 2:54 in the morning, patient and methodical, explaining how to make a 71-year-old man doubt his own mind. Rebecca pressed both hands flat against the table. A sound came out of her, not a word, not quite a cry, something broken and involuntary from somewhere below her sternum. Then the footage from inside the house. Michael placing my keys in the refrigerator. Rebecca holding her phone, recording me searching for medication she had hidden, and then the brief, quickly suppressed smile. "Oh, God," Rebecca said into her palms. "Oh, God." "Don't say anything," Michael said, his voice hard and stripped of warmth. "Not one word." The screen changed. Michael's brokerage accounts, 6 of them. The loss column in red, $614,000 accumulated across months. Then the betting accounts, 11 of them, $287,000 in losses. The most recent entry, $400 on a college basketball game placed 9 days ago at 2 in the morning. Rebecca took her hands from her face. She looked at the screen. She looked at Michael. $400, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 9 days ago. We were about to sign those papers, and you were still betting. Rebecca, don't. The word came out like something snapping. Don't you dare. Then the email appeared. 4 sentences on the screen addressed to Dr. Raymond Warren from an account registered to Michael Harlow. The language was careful. The meaning was impossible to misread. Agent Simmons addressed the room. Michael James Harlow, you are being charged under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 15,610.30, Elder Financial Abuse, California. Penal Code, Section 632, Criminal Surveillance. California Penal Code, Section 502, Unauthorized Computer Access. California Probate Code, Section 1801, Conservatorship Fraud. California Penal Code, Section 67.5, Bribery. And 18 United States Code, Section 1343, Federal Wire Fraud. Michael turned to Rebecca. Tell them this was your idea. Tell them it was his plan. Rebecca's voice was flat and stripped and entirely certain. She looked at Simmons. I wanted to ask my father for a loan. Michael said a loan wasn't enough. He had the cameras ordered before I agreed to anything. She stopped, swallowed hard enough that I heard it. I knew it was wrong from the beginning. I just kept thinking we'd fix it before it got this far. The deputy from the DA's office placed a document in front of me. Mr. Walker, the papers presented to you today are legally void. A power of attorney signed under conditions of undue influence is without effect under California Probate Code. Your assets and your property remain entirely your own. I picked up the document and held it. My house, my accounts, my life, still mine. When they moved to Rebecca with the handcuffs, she didn't resist. She held out her wrists and kept her eyes on the floor. But before the detective finished, she looked up at me. Her face was open and wrecked tears running unchecked, and underneath everything she had done, I could see the child who had been afraid of thunderstorms and the young woman who had sat beside me at her mother's funeral. Dad, she said, just that. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I know, Rebecca, I said, not forgiveness, not condemnation. The most honest thing I had left. The door closed behind them. The room was quiet. Outside the window, Colorado Boulevard moved the way it always moved, ordinary and unhurried and entirely unaware. I placed both hands flat on the table. I breathed. 3 days after the conference room, Agent Simmons called. There's one more thing you should know, she said. About Michael. Investigators had found on his digital devices a one-way ticket to Mexico City, purchased 6 months ago, under a name that was not his own. They had also found a bank account at a credit union in Burbank containing $47,000 transferred in small amounts over 18 months. The account had one authorized user, Michael Harlow. Rebecca's name appeared nowhere on it. He was going to leave her, I said. She was not a partner in his exit plan, Simmons said quietly. She was part of what he was exiting from. I thought about Rebecca in Patrick's conference room, hands shaking genuinely, believing that she and Michael would use my money to start over together. He had been planning to disappear while she was still standing in that room, thinking they were partners. It didn't make her innocent, but it made the picture complete. The trial moved faster than Patrick expected. He said the volume of documented evidence left very little for either defense team to contest the footage, the audio recordings, the emails, the financial records. Everything had existed before the arrest. There was almost nothing left to argue about, except sentencing. I testified on the second day. Dr. Susan Holt testified on the third. She brought her November assessment and dismantled Warren's fraudulent report sentence by sentence, with the quiet authority of someone who knows exactly where weak work falls apart. Dr. Warren lost his medical license before the trial concluded. Rebecca had entered a cooperation agreement in February and provided testimony about the planning stages of the scheme. Her charges were reduced. She would serve time, but considerably less than Michael. Michael received 7 years on the California convictions. The federal wire fraud charge added 18 months to be served consecutively. His attorney argued for leniency. The judge noted that the absence of violence was not a mitigating factor in a scheme designed to strip a grieving man of his home and his dignity. I sold the house on Oak Knoll Drive in September. Not because I was afraid, because some things change what a place means to you in ways that repainting the walls cannot fix. I moved to Santa Barbara in October, a single-story house, 3 rooms, a narrow deck facing west over the Pacific. On the first morning, I carried coffee out and stood there while the ocean moved below me steadily without interruption, the way it had been moving long before any of this happened and would continue long after. In November, I established the Thomas and Margaret Walker Elder Protection Trust. In the first 3 months, we helped 11 people. From Rebecca, I received letters. The first arrived in December. She did not begin with an apology. She began with a memory the morning after Margaret's diagnosis, when she had driven to Pasadena and sat on the front porch until I came downstairs. She had not known what to say. She had just sat there. I read the letter twice. I placed it in the cedar box beside Margaret's recipe notebook, 1 finger width from the right edge. I did not write back. Not yet. What saved me was not the cameras or Laura's equipment or Patrick's 40 years of careful practice. What saved me was the moment I stopped believing that age had made me wrong and trusted what 35 years of looking for the truth had taught me to see. The intruder had a key because I gave it to him. The person who screamed was the child I love most. And the only thing I carried out of that house on Oak Knoll Drive was Margaret's recipe notebook in its cedar box. Everything else I left behind. People ask me what I learned from all of this. I'll tell you honestly. I learned that family betrayal doesn't begin with a dramatic moment. It begins with a small decision to choose money over love, to fix one lie with another, until the people you were supposed to protect become the people you are willing to destroy. This is my family's story, and I'm not proud of every chapter of it. I gave my trust to the wrong people at the worst moment of my life. If I could tell you one thing, don't wait until someone is standing over everything you built before you ask whether they truly belong there. I believe the people who love you will never need to convince you that your mind is failing, and I believe that God puts certain instincts in us for a reason. The quiet voice that says something is wrong here is worth more than any reassurance that everything is fine. This family story reminded me that protecting yourself is not the same as closing your heart. You can love someone completely and still refuse to let them take your life from you. If this family betrayal story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me what you would have done differently. And if stories like this matter to you, subscribe because I have more to tell and I don't intend to stop. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. A note, before you go. Some stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and understanding. If that's not what you're looking for today, no hard feelings, choose what serves you best.